The morning sun cast long shadows across the NATO training base in Poland, as soldiers from different countries gathered for the joint exercise. Among them walked Sarah Martinez, a 8-year-old communications specialist from the U.S. Army. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she made her way to the briefing tent, her equipment bag slung over her shoulder. Sarah had been looking forward to this assignment for months. Working alongside elite forces from various nations was an opportunity most soldiers could only dream of. She had trained hard, studied the protocols, and prepared herself mentally for the challenges ahead. What she hadn't prepared for was the reception she would receive from some of her fellow soldiers. As she entered the mess hall for breakfast, conversations seemed to quiet down. Eyes followed her as she moved through the line, selecting her meal with careful deliberation. She had experienced this before in her military career, but something about this felt different. The stares seemed more intense, more judgmental. "Look what they sent us," whispered Corporal Jenkins, a British soldier sitting at a nearby table. His voice carried just enough for Sarah to hear. "Probably got here through some diversity program." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she continued serving herself scrambled eggs and toast. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only made things worse. Instead, she found an empty table in the corner and sat down, opening her tablet to review the day's mission parameters. "I heard she's never even seen real combat," another voice chimed in from behind her. This time it was Sergeant Mueller from the German contingent. "Just pushes papers and operates radios from safe zones." The comments continued throughout breakfast, each one designed to chip away at her confidence. Sarah ate methodically, her training kicking in to help her maintain composure. She had worked too hard to get here to let petty harassment derail her focus. After breakfast, the soldiers assembled in the main briefing room. Commander Thompson, a seasoned officer from the British SAS, stood at the front, with a large map displayed behind him. The mission was a complex simulation, involving multiple phases of reconnaissance, communication relay, and tactical coordination. "This exercise will test every skill you've developed," Commander Thompson announced. "You'll be working in mixed units, and I expect nothing but professional excellence from each of you." As teams were announced, Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Squad, led by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from the Spanish forces. The team included soldiers from 4 different countries, and she could already see the skeptical looks being exchanged. During the first training drill, Sarah's expertise with advanced communication systems became apparent. She coordinated radio traffic between 3 different units, while simultaneously managing satellite uplink protocols that most soldiers had never seen before. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision, her voice calm and clear as she relayed critical information. "Grid reference 247 to 891. Confirm visual on target building," she transmitted, her eyes scanning multiple data streams on her equipment. Despite her obvious competence, the whispered comments continued during breaks. Some soldiers questioned whether she had earned her position or been given special treatment. Others made jokes about her small stature, wondering if she could handle the physical demands of real combat situations. Sarah's roommate, Lisa Chen, a medic from the Canadian Forces, noticed the tension building around her friend. "Don't let them get to you," Lisa said one evening as they prepared for sleep. "I've seen your service record. You've got more field experience than half these guys combined." "It's not about my record," Sarah replied, staring at the ceiling of their shared quarters. "It's about proving myself over and over again, no matter what I've already accomplished." The harassment escalated during the second week of training. Someone had started a rumor that Sarah had received preferential treatment during her previous deployments. The story spread quickly through the base, growing more elaborate with each telling. According to the gossip, she had been kept away from dangerous assignments and given easy postings because of political correctness. During a particularly challenging night exercise, Sarah's unit was tasked with establishing a communication relay point on a hilltop while under simulated enemy fire. The climb was steep and treacherous, made worse by the heavy equipment each soldier carried. Sarah struggled with the weight of her gear, which included not only her personal equipment but also the advanced radio systems she would need to operate. "Maybe we should call for a helicopter to carry our communications princess up the hill," joked Private Anderson from the Norwegian contingent, loud enough for the entire squad to hear. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed harder up the rocky slope. Her legs burned with the effort, and sweat poured down her face despite the cool night air. She refused to ask for help or show any sign of weakness that could be used against her later. At the top of the hill, while others rested, Sarah immediately began setting up the communication array. Her hands worked quickly and efficiently, establishing connections with multiple units spread across the training area. Within minutes, she had created a communication network that allowed real-time coordination between forces that had been operating in isolation. "All stations, this is Overwatch," she transmitted. "Communication relay is active. I have clear signals from all units." The success of the mission depended heavily on her work, but the recognition was minimal. Commander Thompson acknowledged the effective communication coordination in his debrief. But many of the soldiers seemed to dismiss her contribution as simply doing her job, rather than excelling at it. The breaking point came during the third week when someone sabotaged her equipment. Sarah discovered the damage during a routine inspection before a major exercise. Critical components of her radio system had been deliberately damaged, rendering them useless. The sabotage was sophisticated enough to look like equipment failure, but Sarah's technical expertise allowed her to identify the intentional nature of the damage. Standing in the equipment tent, staring at her destroyed gear, Sarah felt a mixture of anger and disappointment wash over her. She had endured weeks of comments, jokes, and undermining behavior. But this crossed a line. Someone was willing to sabotage a mission to make her look incompetent. "Problems with your gear?" asked Sergeant Mueller, appearing at the tent entrance with a smug expression. "Nothing I can't handle," Sarah replied evenly, though inside she was seething. That evening, Sarah worked late into the night, using spare parts and her technical knowledge to rebuild the damaged systems. She wouldn't give her detractors the satisfaction of seeing her fail because of their sabotage. By morning, she had not only repaired the damage but had actually improved the system's capabilities beyond their original specifications. The next day's exercise proved to be the most challenging yet. Sarah's unit was assigned to coordinate a complex multi-phase operation involving air support, ground forces, and naval elements. The success of the entire exercise depended on seamless communication between all components. As the exercise began, Sarah's repaired and upgraded equipment performed flawlessly. She managed communication traffic from 17 different units, coordinating timing and movements with split-second precision. Her voice remained calm and professional even as simulated explosions erupted around their position, and actors playing enemy forces closed in on their location. Air support. This is Overwatch. Target building secured. Redirect to grid 445 to 227. For extraction support, she transmitted while simultaneously coordinating ground unit movements on a separate channel. The exercise was completed ahead of schedule, with 0 communication failures. Commander Thompson's debrief highlighted the exceptional coordination that had made the success possible, though he didn't specifically mention Sarah's role. That evening, as Sarah cleaned her equipment in preparation for the next day's activities, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. A group of soldiers was planning something they called final evaluation. From the fragments she caught, it seemed they intended to create a situation where she would be forced to request evacuation or assistance, finally proving their point about her unsuitability for elite operations. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she secured her gear. She had faced discrimination and harassment throughout her career, but this felt different. These soldiers weren't just questioning her abilities. They were actively working to undermine her safety and the safety of the entire operation. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sarah stared at the ceiling and wondered if she should report what she had overheard. Military protocol was clear about harassment and sabotage, but she also knew that reporting could make her situation worse. Some would see it as proof that she couldn't handle the pressure, while others might retaliate more severely. The sound of helicopters in the distance reminded her that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Elite forces from other nations were arriving for the final phase of the exercise, including some of the most respected special operations units in the world. Among them would be U.S. Navy SEALs, whose reputation for excellence was legendary. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to push away the anxiety about what the next day might bring. She had worked too hard and come too far to let a group of prejudiced soldiers destroy her career or her confidence. Whatever they had planned for their final evaluation, she would face it head-on. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had joined the military to serve alongside the best soldiers in the world, only to find that some of her greatest enemies wore the same uniform she did. Tomorrow would test not just her professional skills but her resilience in the face of deliberate sabotage and harassment. As sleep finally came, Sarah's last thought was about the ghost hawk tattoo hidden beneath her uniform sleeve. It was a reminder of something from her past that these soldiers knew nothing about, something that might change everything if they ever discovered the truth about who she really was and what she had already survived. The thunderous roar of helicopters filled the morning air as the final contingent of elite forces arrived at the NATO training base. Sarah watched from her position near the communications tent as 3 Black Hawks touched down on the landing pad, their rotors creating whirlwinds of dust and debris. From the first helicopter emerged a group of soldiers whose bearing and equipment immediately marked them as U.S. Navy SEALs. Leading the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man whose very presence seemed to command respect from everyone around him. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the confident way he moved, the way other soldiers stepped aside to give him space. This had to be the SEAL commander she had heard rumors about during the morning briefing. Commander Jack "Reaper" Morrison had a reputation that preceded him even in international military circles. At 35, he had led some of the most successful special operations missions in recent history. His teams had extracted hostages from impossible situations, eliminated high-value targets in hostile territory, and completed classified operations that would never make it into official records. As the SEALs gathered their gear and moved toward the main briefing area, Sarah noticed the immediate change in atmosphere around the base. Soldiers who had been casual and relaxed suddenly stood straighter, spoke more quietly, and moved with greater purpose. The presence of such elite operators had a way of elevating everyone's performance. Sarah returned to her equipment checks, trying to focus on the technical specifications for the day's exercise, rather than the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. She had overheard enough conversations the previous evening to know that some of the soldiers were planning to use the arrival of the SEALs as an opportunity to expose what they saw as her inadequacy. Going to be interesting to see how our communications specialist performs when real operators are watching, she heard Corporal Jenkins comment to his group as they passed her position. The morning briefing brought together over 200 soldiers from 12 different nations. Commander Thompson stood at the front with Commander Morrison and other senior officers from the newly arrived units. The final exercise would be the most complex yet, involving a simulated rescue operation in urban terrain with multiple variables and unexpected complications. "This exercise will push every one of you to your limits," Commander Thompson announced. "We'll be evaluating not just individual performance, but how well you integrate with unfamiliar teams under extreme pressure." Sarah found herself assigned to Charlie Team, which would be responsible for establishing and maintaining communications during the most critical phase of the operation. To her surprise, the team leader was Lieutenant Hayes, one of Commander Morrison's SEAL operators. Hayes was younger than she had expected, probably in his late 20s, with the quiet intensity that seemed common among special operations personnel. "I've reviewed your service record," Lieutenant Hayes told her during the team briefing. "Impressive technical qualifications. I'm counting on you to keep us connected when things get complicated." It was the first purely professional acknowledgement of her abilities she had received in weeks, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. She would not let this team down, regardless of what obstacles others might place in her path. The exercise began at dawn with Charlie Team moving through the mock urban environment that had been constructed on the far side of the base. The scenario involved a hostage situation in a multi-story building, with friendly forces approaching from 3 different directions while maintaining communication blackout to avoid detection. Sarah carried nearly 60 pounds of communication equipment as the team moved through the simulated city streets. The gear included not only standard radio systems but also advanced satellite uplinks, signal jammers, and electronic surveillance equipment. Each piece was critical to the mission's success. As they reached their designated position in a building overlooking the target area, Sarah began establishing the communication network. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls, setting up encrypted channels, testing signal strength, and creating backup protocols. The work required intense concentration while remaining alert to the tactical situation developing around them. Overwatch. This is Charlie Base. She transmitted on a secured channel. Communication array is operational. All teams show green signals. Through her headset, she could hear the careful coordination between teams as they moved into position. The exercise controllers had introduced several complications, including simulated equipment failures and unexpected enemy movements. Sarah's job was to adapt the communication network in real time to address these challenges. 20 minutes into the operation, the first deliberate sabotage attempt occurred. Sarah noticed interference on several channels that didn't match any of the planned exercise variables. The signal disruption was subtle but consistent with jamming equipment being operated nearby. She quickly traced the interference to its source and discovered it was coming from equipment operated by Sergeant Muller's team, which was supposed to be providing communication support for Alpha Team. Instead of reporting the interference, Muller was deliberately creating it to disrupt Sarah's network. Without alerting anyone to the sabotage, Sarah quietly activated backup frequencies and rerouted communications through alternative channels. Her years of training in electronic warfare allowed her to counter the interference while actually improving the overall network performance. Charlie Base. This is Alpha Lead, came a voice through her headset. We're experiencing some communication difficulties. Roger, Alpha Lead. I've identified the issue and implemented a solution. You should have clear communications now, Sarah responded. Her voice steady despite her anger at the deliberate interference. Lieutenant Hayes, who was monitoring the communications from his position, noticed the quick resolution of the problem. Good work, Martinez, he said over the team channel. Whatever you did, it worked. As the exercise progressed, the sabotage attempts became more obvious and more dangerous. Someone had provided false grid coordinates to the exercise controllers, creating a situation where friendly forces were at risk of engaging each other. Sarah caught the error by cross-referencing multiple data sources and quickly transmitted corrected information to all teams. All stations, this is Charlie Base. Disregard previous coordinates for checkpoint Delta. Correct position is grid 334 to 556. I repeat, 334 to 556. The correction prevented what could have been a disastrous friendly fire incident, even in a training environment. Sarah's quick thinking and technical expertise had averted a situation that could have ended military careers and damaged international relationships. Commander Morrison, who had been monitoring communications from the command post, took notice of the professional handling of the crisis. He made a note to himself to find out more about the soldier who had demonstrated such competence under pressure. The climax of the exercise came when Charlie Team was tasked with providing communication support during the actual assault on the target building. Sarah's position was in an exposed location that offered the best signal coverage but left her vulnerable to simulated enemy fire. As the assault teams moved into position, Sarah maintained constant communication with all elements, while also monitoring electronic surveillance feeds from drones and ground sensors. The information flow was overwhelming, requiring her to process and relay dozens of critical updates every minute. Bravo team, hold position. Motion detector shows movement on the third floor. East side, she transmitted, while simultaneously coordinating air support and tracking the location of friendlies throughout the building. In the middle of the most intense phase of the exercise, Sarah's primary communication system suddenly failed. Not a gradual degradation or interference, but a complete system shutdown that threatened to leave multiple teams without coordination at the most critical moment. Sarah immediately recognized the failure as another act of sabotage. Someone had planted a small device in her equipment that created a feedback loop, frying several key components. But this time, the sabotage was so obvious that it couldn't be hidden or explained away as equipment failure. Without missing a beat, Sarah switched to her backup systems and began rerouting all communication traffic through emergency protocols. Her training kicked in as muscle memory, allowing her to maintain critical communications even while her primary equipment lay dead. All stations, this is Charlie Base. Primary system is down. Switching to backup protocols. Maintain current positions until communications are restored. Lieutenant Hayes, who was only 30 feet away from Sarah's position, witnessed both the equipment failure and her immediate response. He could see the small device that had been planted in her gear, its distinctive design marking it as military-grade sabotage equipment. Working with incredible speed, Sarah had the backup systems operational within 3 minutes. The exercise continued without significant delay, but Hayes made sure to secure the sabotage device as evidence of what had occurred. As the exercise concluded successfully, with the hostages rescued and all teams accounted for, Sarah began the process of documenting the equipment failure for her after-action report. She photographed the damaged components and the sabotage device, building a clear case of deliberate interference with military operations. Commander Morrison approached Charlie Team's position during the post-exercise debrief. He had been reviewing communication logs and wanted to understand how his team had maintained such effective coordination despite the multiple technical challenges that had occurred. "Outstanding work today," he told Lieutenant Hayes. "Your team's communication coordination was flawless. I want to know who was responsible for that level of performance." Hayes gestured toward Sarah, who was still working on her equipment diagnostics. "Martinez handled all communications, sir. She dealt with multiple equipment failures and interference, kept all teams connected throughout the operation." Morrison studied Sarah for a moment, noting her focused professionalism and the complex array of equipment she was managing. Something about her bearings suggested more experience than her apparent age would indicate. As the teams gathered for the formal debrief, the sabotage became harder to hide. Too many people had witnessed equipment failures that didn't match normal breakdown patterns. The sophisticated nature of the interference suggested someone with advanced technical knowledge and access to specialized equipment. Commander Thompson called for a full investigation into the communication disruptions that had occurred during the exercise. While he praised the overall success of the operation, he made it clear that any deliberate interference with training operations would be treated as a serious breach of military discipline. That evening, as Sarah cleaned and repaired her equipment, Lieutenant Hayes approached her work area. He carried the sabotage device that he had recovered from her gear, along with a folder containing documentation of the interference patterns they had detected. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "about what really happened out there today." Sarah looked up from her work, meeting his gaze steadily. She had been expecting this conversation, had been prepared for it since the first day of harassment began. "Someone's been targeting you specifically," Hayes continued. "This isn't random equipment failure or normal military hazing. This is deliberate sabotage of military operations." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion outside the equipment tent drew their attention. Commander Morrison was approaching with 2 of his senior operators, their expressions serious and purposeful. Behind them walked Commander Thompson and several other senior officers from different national contingents. The investigation was about to become official, and Sarah realized that everything was about to change. The harassment and sabotage that she had endured in relative isolation was about to become an international incident involving some of the most elite military units in the world. The investigation began immediately after the evening meal, with senior officers from all participating nations gathering in the main conference room. Sarah found herself at the center of attention as evidence of the systematic sabotage was presented. The sophisticated nature of the interference devices and the coordinated timing of the attacks made it clear that multiple personnel had been involved. Commander Morrison took charge of the investigation with the methodical precision that had made him legendary in special operations circles. He reviewed communication logs, examined the physical evidence, and interviewed witnesses with the thoroughness of someone who understood that careers and international relationships hung in the balance. "This wasn't simple hazing or professional rivalry," Morrison stated as he addressed the assembled officers. "Someone deliberately sabotaged critical military equipment during joint NATO exercises. This constitutes a serious breach of military discipline and international cooperation protocols." Sarah was asked to provide a detailed account of the harassment and sabotage she had experienced over the past 3 weeks. As she spoke, describing each incident with careful precision, she could see the growing anger and disbelief on the faces of the senior officers. What had seemed like isolated incidents of poor behavior was revealed as a sustained campaign of harassment. Lieutenant Hayes corroborated her account, adding his observations of the equipment sabotage he had witnessed during the final exercise. The technical evidence was overwhelming. with digital forensics showing clear patterns of deliberate interference rather than random equipment failure. Commander Thompson's face grew increasingly grim as the scope of the conspiracy became apparent. "These actions have undermined the credibility of this entire exercise," he said. "They've endangered personnel and compromised our training objectives." As the investigation continued into the evening, several soldiers were called in for questioning. Sergeant Muller was among the first, his confident demeanor quickly crumbling when confronted with digital evidence of his communication jamming activities. Corporal Jenkins and Private Anderson followed, each attempting to minimize their involvement while pointing fingers at the others. The breaking point came when Sarah was asked to demonstrate her technical capabilities for the investigating officers. As she worked with the communication equipment, explaining complex protocols and showing her expertise with advanced systems, Commander Morrison noticed something that made him pause. Sarah had rolled up her sleeves to work more comfortably with the equipment, and for the first time since arriving at the base, the lower portion of a tattoo became visible on her forearm. It was just a small section, but Morrison's trained eye immediately recognized the distinctive design elements. "Martinez," he said quietly, stepping closer to examine the partial tattoo. "That marking on your arm, can you show me the complete design?" Sarah hesitated, knowing that revealing the full tattoo would change everything. The Ghost Hawk insignia was known only to members of a highly classified special operations program, one that officially didn't exist, and whose participants were sworn to absolute secrecy. "Sir, I'm not sure that's relevant to the current investigation," Sarah replied carefully. Morrison's expression became more intense. "I think it's very relevant. I need to see that tattoo." "Soldier." With obvious reluctance, Sarah rolled up her sleeve completely, revealing the full Ghost Hawk design. The intricate tattoo showed a stylized helicopter silhouette, with wings that seemed to fade into mist, surrounded by stars that indicated specific mission completions. Only a handful of people in the entire military were authorized to wear that particular insignia. The room fell silent as Morrison studied the tattoo. His face went rigid as the implications became clear. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a communications specialist who had been assigned to the NATO exercises. She was a veteran of some of the most classified operations in military history. "Ghost Hawk Squadron," Morrison said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "You were part of Operation Nightfall." Sarah nodded slowly, maintaining eye contact with the SEAL commander. "Among others, sir. The Ghost Hawk Squadron was a joint special operations unit that had operated in complete secrecy for nearly 5 years. They had conducted missions that were so classified that most senior military officers had never heard of them. The unit had been dissolved 2 years earlier after completing their final operation, with members reassigned to conventional units throughout the military. Operation Nightfall had been the squadron's most dangerous mission, involving the extraction of captured intelligence officers from a hostile territory where no government could officially operate. The mission had required flying modified helicopters through heavily defended airspace, executing a precision raid, and escaping without leaving any evidence of American involvement. Commander Morrison had been briefed on Operation Nightfall during his own classified assignments, though he had never met any of the personnel involved. The mission was considered one of the most successful special operations in recent history, but its classified nature meant that the participants had received no public recognition for their extraordinary service. "You were the communications specialist for the Nightfall extraction," Morrison continued, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "Your team flew 3 helicopters into enemy territory and brought out 7 prisoners without firing a shot. The mission succeeded because of perfect communication coordination," Sarah confirmed. "We had a 30-second window for extraction. Any communication failure would have meant capture or death for all personnel involved." Lieutenant Hayes, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, began to understand why Sarah's technical skills had seemed so exceptional. She wasn't just a communications specialist. She was a veteran of operations where the slightest mistake meant mission failure and loss of life. Commander Thompson looked stunned as he processed this information. "Why didn't this appear in your service record for this exercise?" "Ghost Hawk assignments are compartmentalized, sir," Sarah explained. "Only personnel with specific clearance levels have access to that information." My assignment here was based on my conventional service record. The revelation completely recontextualized everything that had happened during the past 3 weeks. The soldiers who had been harassing and sabotaging Sarah's work had been targeting a veteran of some of the most dangerous operations in military history. Their assumptions about her inexperience and unsuitability for elite operations were not just wrong. They were almost comically misguided. Morrison's anger was now directed entirely at the soldiers who had been responsible for the harassment. These people sabotaged equipment operated by a Ghost Hawk veteran, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. They endangered lives and compromised operations conducted by someone with more combat experience than most of them will see in their entire careers. The interrogation of the responsible soldiers took on a much more serious tone once Sarah's background was revealed. What had been treated as a case of harassment and minor sabotage was now seen as a deliberate attack on a highly decorated special operations veteran. Sergeant Mueller, when confronted with the truth about Sarah's service record, became defensive and tried to justify his actions. How were we supposed to know? She never said anything about special operations. That's exactly the point, Morrison responded coldly. You made assumptions based on prejudice, rather than taking the time to understand who you were working with. Your actions could have compromised not just this exercise, but ongoing classified operations. The investigation concluded with formal charges being filed against 5 soldiers from 3 different national contingents. The charges ranged from harassment and conduct unbecoming to deliberate sabotage of military equipment. The international nature of the exercise meant that each soldier would face charges within their own military justice system. Commander Thompson issued a formal apology to Sarah on behalf of the NATO command structure. Your service to this exercise and to the international community has been exemplary, he said. The actions taken against you were completely unacceptable and do not reflect the values we strive to uphold. As the investigation wrapped up, Commander Morrison asked to speak with Sarah privately. They walked to a quiet area of the base where they could talk without being overheard. I need to ask you something, Morrison said. Why didn't you reveal your background when the harassment started? You could have ended all of this with a simple conversation. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. Because I shouldn't have to prove my worth through past achievements, she said. My performance during these exercises should have been enough. The fact that I had to endure weeks of harassment and sabotage before anyone took it seriously shows that there are deeper problems that need to be addressed. Morrison nodded slowly, understanding the point she was making. You're right. The system failed you long before anyone discovered your Ghost Hawk background. I wanted to succeed or fail based on my current performance, not on classified operations that most people can't even know about, Sarah continued. Every soldier deserves to be evaluated fairly, regardless of their background or personal characteristics. The conversation continued as they discussed the broader implications of what had happened. Sarah's experience highlighted systemic issues within military culture that went far beyond individual prejudice or harassment. The willingness of multiple soldiers to engage in sabotage showed a level of institutional failure that needed to be addressed at the highest levels. As the NATO exercises concluded the following day, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. Instead of being the outsider, struggling for acceptance, she had become a symbol of excellence and professionalism that other soldiers aspired to emulate. The revelation of her Ghost Hawk background had transformed how others saw her. But it had also raised uncomfortable questions about military culture and values. Commander Morrison made a point of publicly recognizing Sarah's contributions during the closing ceremony. The success of these exercises was made possible by the exceptional skill and professionalism of soldiers like communications specialist Martinez, he announced to the assembled troops. Her technical expertise and dedication to mission success exemplify the highest standards of military service. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, coming from soldiers who had witnessed her performance throughout the exercises. But Sarah knew that the real victory wasn't in the recognition she received, but in the conversations and policy changes that would follow from the investigation. In her final report on the exercises, Sarah made specific recommendations for preventing similar incidents in future international training operations. She advocated for better integration protocols, improved oversight of equipment security, and mandatory training on harassment prevention for all personnel participating in joint exercises. As she packed her equipment for the return trip to her home base, Sarah reflected on the past month. She had faced deliberate sabotage and systematic harassment, but she had also proven that excellence speaks for itself when given the opportunity. The Ghost Hawk tattoo on her arm was just a symbol. Her true strength came from her commitment to serving with honor, regardless of the obstacles placed in her path. The final irony was that the soldiers who had spent weeks questioning her qualifications and suitability for elite operations had revealed themselves to be the ones truly unsuited for the professional standards expected of International 5 military cooperation. Their actions had not only ended their own careers, but had also sparked changes that would benefit countless soldiers in future operations. Commander Morrison's final words to her, as she prepared to leave, captured the significance of what had transpired. You didn't just survive their attempts to destroy your career. You used their actions to make the entire system better for everyone who comes after you.